Hello, Mrs. Redneck here, and today I'm going to share with you how I make chicken and sausage gumbo almost from scratch. The only thing that matters now is everything you think of me. In you I find my worth, in you I find my identity. I say almost from scratch because I'm going to use a rotisserie chicken from a club store. And I'll show you how I prepare the chicken, prepare the chicken stock. We'll make a roux from scratch, we'll add the seasonings, and then we'll add the other ingredients and the chicken meat. The first step is to make the chicken broth. This can be done the afternoon before, if that works out better for your schedule, or the morning or very early afternoon. Don't wait too long. This dish takes a while. Alright, this rotisserie chicken has some liquid in it. I'm going to use that and add that to the broth. I'm also going to add some celery tops, which you don't often use for cooking anyway. And we'll take those out after the broth is made. I'm also adding a couple of bay leaves. Now this chicken is already seasoned, and so I'm not going to add additional seasonings to the broth at this time. We'll be adding plenty of seasoning later. Next, I'm going to take large pieces of meat off of this chicken and reserve it to cut into bite-sized pieces later. The reason I don't put the entire chicken into the pot as I'm making the broth is that I just think it gets overcooked that way and it gets stringy and starts to come apart. So it's really a personal preference with regard to how the broth tastes and then the texture of the chicken later. Obviously, I'm leaving quite a bit of meat, which means, yes, we will be picking the chicken later. I washed my hands thoroughly before this, and so please don't worry. We have a clean cutting board and a clean knife, and so we're working with the chicken. Again, not working too hard to get all of the meat off, and we'll just toss that right into the pot for our broth making. And all of that, little bits of meat will get much softer as it cooks and will be easy to take off. Now, this rotisserie chicken has an elastic string holding parts of it together. Don't cook the string. This pot that I'm using is an 8-quart pot. It has a thick bottom. You don't want to be using a stock pot that has a thin bottom, or the bottom of your gumbo will tend to burn. For the recipe that I'm making, you do need at least an 8-quart pot. You'll see it's pretty full by the end. You could use a larger one if that's what you have. I wouldn't suggest using a smaller one unless you proportionally decrease the ingredients that you're using. The rotisserie chicken lends a very good flavor to the gumbo. Otherwise, I like to roast the chicken, and that obviously adds more time and effort. However, if you're already cooking chicken for your family for some other reason, then you can roast some chicken pieces parts. It certainly doesn't have to be a whole chicken. It can be chicken leg thighs or chicken breasts if your family prefers one meat over the other. But the point of gumbo is that it all gets mixed up, and it's so, so good. In my stock pot, I have put the chicken and the 2 bay leaves and the celery tops, and I've filled it with water just to cover the chicken, and that's about halfway in this 8-quart pot. That's not quite 4 quarts of water, right, because there's already chicken in there. So we're at somewhere between 2.5 and 3 quarts of water. I'm going to put the lid on, have it on high heat to bring it to boiling, and then I'll just turn it down to low heat. I'm going to let that simmer for at least an hour and a half, which is why you want to start early. I'm returning to the gumbo after about an hour and 45 minutes. The timing's not exact. I was busy doing other things going on about my day. And now I've come back and I'm going to turn the heat off. And you can see that the color of the broth has changed. There's a little bit of fat floating on top, not a whole lot. But the broth is cloudy because it's got nutrients in it and it's got flavor in it. When the gumbo's all done and you refrigerate it, when you come back the next day, any leftovers that is, you'll see that it's solid. It's not soup-like. That's because of the protein that is transferred from the bones to the broth during this process. So right now I'm taking everything out. You'll see it's steaming. It's very hot. You could continue with the rest of the gumbo at this point, but I have some other things to do, so I'm going to let it cool off for 15-20 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and finish the rest. It's been about 20 minutes that I let these things cool off, and I did want to point out that under the colander I put a bowl because a little bit of the broth does get in there. I'm going to return it to the pan, and the next stage I'm going to go ahead and put the whole colander on top of this container that will ultimately hold the gumbo or the leftover gumbo in the refrigerator. I will take the somewhat cooled broth. I'm going to pour it through the colander as well. You could use a separate strainer, but believe it or not, I'm trying to conserve dishes. And the reason for that, I don't know if you can see, but towards the bottom, there's a few tiny bones and things that I don't want ultimately ending up in the gumbo. And so I go ahead and run that through the strainer. And so this says that I have about 2 quarts of broth, and that's due to evaporation that happened during the boiling process. I'm going to set that aside, meaning the broth. I'm going to put the chicken pieces back over my catch bowl. I'm going to keep this bay leaf because it will keep adding flavor. And next I'm going to pick this chicken. And so I usually bring the trash can over, and what I will do is look through and see now there's chunks of nice meat, and I will separate that into a bowl and then discard the bones. And we'll add this to the meat that we were reserved to add to the gumbo later. As I work on picking this chicken, it gives me an opportunity to share with you a couple of other things. Gumbo, the way I make it anyway, is definitely slow food, opposite of fast food. So I will plan to make it on a day when I know I'm going to be around all day anyway. That way I'm not stressed trying to finish it or, with competing interest. It only needs hands-on from time to time, but you have to stay close. So in these videos, I like to give you something for your heart and for your home. And we haven't talked about something for your heart today. So the process of making gumbo reminded me of the scripture in Psalm 119, verse 15, that says, I meditate on your precepts, that's God's precepts, and consider your ways. And that's also talking about slowing down to pay attention to what's in God's Word. In verse 5 and 6, a little bit earlier in that chapter, it tells us that when our ways are steadfast, we will not be put to shame before God. That's definitely something I want. And so sometimes when my husband comments on how good the gumbo is, I'll say, yeah, I put the love in it. Which means I took my time, I paid attention to the details. And similarly, we can put the love in our relationship with God by spending time with Him and His Word. Alright, so I've finished picking the chicken, and this is some of what's left. And what I'd like to show you is that it took me less than 10 minutes, but I got this much more chicken off of those bones, so it's definitely a step worth taking. It's almost time to make the roux, but before I do, I'm going to prepare the aromatics because even though the roux takes patience, and we'll demonstrate that, when it's ready, it's go time, and the other ingredients, these aromatics, need to be added right away into the roux before the broth. So I'm going to prepare them. I'm going to take 2 cloves of garlic, a large jalapeno. You might want 2, depending on whether your jalapenos have been grown in the north or the south and how hot they are. I sometimes add onion, sometimes not. I'll probably add a little bit of vidalia sweet onion today. 1 green pepper. It's been washed. I'm going to seed it. I'm going to rough chop these and then chop them very small in my little food chopper. But you can certainly chop them by hand if that's your preference, or in a large food processor, which I don't happen to have because I just don't need one the way that I cook. We're going to trim the celery. So what do we have? We have 1 green bell pepper, 1 or 2 jalapenos, a couple cloves of garlic, a stalk of celery, some sweet onion. We will be adding black pepper and Tony's Creole seasoning, but that will come a little bit later. To make the roux for the gumbo, we only need 2 ingredients. Flour, of which I put half a cup of flour in there for the amount of gumbo I'm making, which is my typical. And I'll do a little shy. Some people will tell you do equal parts, but I'll go ahead and cut it a little bit and do somewhere between 1/3 of a cup and 1/2 of a cup of just vegetable oil. I've tried other oils, olive oil and so forth, but vegetable oil or canola oil really is, I find, the best. We also need heat and time. So I haven't turned the heat on yet. I'm stirring the oil and the flour together, and you'll see it's a light creamy color, like you would expect. If I were to make the gumbo with this, it would be kind of gross. The roux, R-O-U-X, imparts both flavor and thickness to the gumbo. I'm going to turn the heat on medium-high. This is going to take 10 to 15 minutes, which is where the patience comes in. We do not want to turn the heat up higher. That's not going to help it turn out well. In these videos, I like to give you something for your heart and for your home. Making roux reminds me of Ecclesiastes 7, verse 8, which says, "The end of a matter is better than the beginning, and patience is better than pride." The roux will turn out good if you can be patient and diligent to keep stirring. You notice I haven't stopped stirring, and that is on purpose. Again, we have this on medium-high heat. We cannot hurry it up by turning it to high heat. That will cause it to burn. If we put it on low heat or lower heat, that might still work, but it would take you a much longer time. For me, making roux or learning to make roux took bravery. Why? Well, because a rule of thumb is that you're supposed to keep cooking it. Let's see, where did I put that here? You're supposed to keep cooking it until it's about the color of a copper penny. And before I knew how to make roux, if I had a gravy base that was that dark and didn't have beef stock or something, you know, where I started with just flour and water, I would say I had burnt it. But nope, you just got to be brave. You won't see much happening in the first few minutes, but then the flour will start to turn brown, and once it starts to turn, it happens very quickly. So do not take your eye off of the roux. I'm making the roux in a heavy bottom pot that I will use to finish the gumbo as well. Similar to avoiding heat that's too high, if your pot has too thin a metal on the bottom, the roux will also overheat and burn. See, we have a nice boil going on. I didn't change the heat. It just was a matter of heating up the oil and the flour. I'm going to switch arms for stirring. And even though it's boiling and I've been stirring, you can see we really don't have much change in color yet. But it's coming. It takes patience and bravery, at least for me, to make roux. Patience, because it takes time, 10 to 15 minutes. bravery because when I start to see flour turning brown, I start to think burning. And I am tempted to take it off of the heat. You know, how about now? How about now? I think I should take it off before it burns. But no, we really want this to get dark brown, almost to the color of a penny. It took me a while to be brave enough to let it go that long. As soon as that happens, though, we'll be adding our aromatics. If you remember, stop stirring for 1 second. I told you I was going to chop these up fine, or you could chop them by hand. This looks like a lot. We'll put that into the roux and into the roux base, and we'll cook it for about a minute right after the roux is done. That will release aromatics into the air, and it's about that time often that people start wandering through the kitchen saying, ooh, what is going on in here, because it smells really good. An interesting thing about those aromatics is that you won't know they're in there except by the flavor. You won't have these little chunks of vegetables left by the time the gumbo is finished. You will have this delicious gravy and the larger ingredients, the chicken, the sausage, and the okra. Ooh, I think I detect a little bit of a tan coming on here in this flour. Now we've got almost a golden color happening instead of that pasty color. But this is not it, not yet. You can see that the flour begins to stick a little bit, not in terms of actually sticking to the pan where you have to scrape it off, just this is turning into more of a paste, right, and a little less fluid. But the technique is the same. Keep stirring, keep moving it all around so that it continues to brown evenly. Now you can buy roux base in the grocery store, or at least you can in the South. It comes in various forms. There are forms in sort of, mason jars or mayonnaise jar type of containers. And then there are some that are dry and you add water to it. I've used those before and I don't mind them, but I have to tell you, my husband knows. He can tell if I've made the roux from scratch. And since it's something he really appreciates, that's just how I do it. Another benefit of making your own roux is obviously I'm not adding any preservatives or ingredients that I don't know the names of. See, we're getting brown. This is not yet though. Not done yet. This is about where I would start to get nervous, right? Not yet. It's not the color of a penny. But it'll go quick from here. Got to keep stirring. See that? And it's kind of becoming more paste-like, even more so. And the color begins to change. At least to me, it seems like the color is changing faster at this point. It might be just because I get nervous about burning it. Look at that. Oh. Should we check with our penny? I like that. All right. And that's the roux. What we're going to do next is add these aromatics, and it's going to be a big and wonderful sound and a cloud of delicious steam. And what I'm doing now is continuing to stir, because you do get some, it tries to stick to the bottom, but if you continually stir, it will become a paste. And you stir up all those bits on the bottom of the pan, and that's good. That's going to add good flavor. We're letting these saute just a bit. Next, I'm going to add the chicken broth that we prepared just a little bit at first. Here we go. Woo! And the reason I want just a little is I'm using it, you may have heard the term to deglazing a pan, like after you saute something. That little bit will help me deglaze or get up the little stuck bits at the bottom, which is all good. Boy, I wish you could smell this. Look at that. Alright. If you haven't made gumbo before, that doesn't exactly look like soup that you normally have, does it? Alright, you can already see those vegetables starting to disappear. Woo, that's the jalapeno. Okay, now I will add the rest of the chicken broth. Ooh, and there's the bay leaves. I'm going to go ahead and leave them in there. Now I'm going to stir gently until it's mixed. Now this does look more soup-like, but as we cook it and as we add the other ingredients, this is going to thicken back up. I'll be right back with the next ingredients. Now is when I add the final seasoning type ingredients, and I add about a tablespoon of Tony's Creole seasoning. I've done this so much. And I warn you, I have about a 30-second delayed sneeze reaction when I use Tony's, can't help it. And I'm going to put 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper. You don't have to fresh grind it, but I happen to have this, so I'm just going to keep grinding until I think there's about a teaspoon in there. You can always add more later because you will taste it after a while to make sure that the seasoning is right. So we'll stir that in there. I'm going to add 2 more ingredients, and I'm going to reserve the chicken. I am not adding the chicken yet. This is chicken, and I'm using smoked beef sausage. If you wanted to use a pork sausage, I guess you could, but we like to use beef. And a big bag of cut okra, not breaded, just frozen and cut. This is a 28-ounce bag. You can also get 12-ounce bags of which you'll want 2. And now you're saying, oh my goodness, are you making an okra stew? No. The okra will cook down, and you just add it right in there frozen. Keep the heat on medium-high until it begins to boil. The okra will cook down and also add body to the gumbo. Some people call it, you cook the snot out of the okra. So we've added the okra and the beef sausage here to the gumbo. Going to go ahead and allow it to come back to a boil, and then cook it down really for at least a couple of hours on lower heat. Again, go about my day. I have not added the chicken yet. I will add the chicken within the last half hour or so. Otherwise, I find it can get stringy, and I just like the texture and the flavor because the chicken's already cooked in this case. Okay, this gumbo has been simmering for about an hour. Let's check on it. You can see the character is kind of changing. We've got a nice uniform thick gravy. No more little pieces of the aromatics that we added earlier. The okra has definitely come along, and the beef sausage is adding flavor. We're going to let this go for another hour or so. We'll test the gravy, see if it needs any more seasoning, and then we'll add the chicken half an hour or so before we serve. Now, I wanted to point out 2 things to you. If you make gumbo regularly, you may be wondering, where is the filet? Filet, F-I-L-E, is ground sassafras leaves. And I don't make my gumbo by putting the filet in it, but we do serve it on the side. I put a shaker lid on a little mason jar, and we serve it and put it on our gumbo afterward. Well, it's been about another hour since we last visited, and this gumbo is just about ready for tonight. But what's missing? The chicken. So, the chicken has been in the refrigerator in this time. It's not good to just leave that sitting out for hours. So it's been in the refrigerator, and now I'm going to add it. Give it a gentle stir. This is also a good time, which maybe I should have done it before I added the chicken, but you can get yourself a measuring cup or something, take a little bit of the broth, set it aside, let it cool for a minute so you don't burn your tongue, and taste that to see if you need to add any other seasoning adjustments to the gumbo. Oh, that looks really good now. I'm going to let that heat up just a bit and then turn the heat off. And we serve our gumbo with rice. A lot of people eat gumbo with white rice. I made brown rice for us because we're trying to eat a little healthier. And I already talked about the filet. Also, it's traditional to serve gumbo with either saltine crackers or oyster crackers. And we like to also eat our gumbo with tortilla chips, like instead of crackers, either or. So what you do is you take a scoop of rice and put it in the bowl, and you take one or more scoops of gumbo and enjoy. So we have chicken and beef sausage gumbo. There are different kinds of gumbos, duck gumbo, seafood gumbo. This gumbo keeps very well in the freezer. You can put it in individual containers or divide it up for a future meal and freeze it and make yourself some fresh rice when you're ready to bring it out and cook it. I make this gumbo all year, and it's our favorite.
There is a Redeemer, Jesus, God's own Son, precious Lamb of God, Messiah, Holy One. Jesus, my Redeemer, name above all names, precious Lamb of God, Messiah, oh, for sinners slain. Thank you, oh my Father, for giving